feeling low.
Well, hello there, my lemon slices, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Brianna. I'm a certified personal trainer, a big, huge biology nerd, and a registered dietitian to be. We're assembled here today for episode 3 of my newest series, True Science. This is a series in which I combine my interest in true crime with my love of science. Here we talk about everything from doctors that turned out to be frauds, crazy medical phenomenon, mad scientists, and everything in between. Today's topic, disgraced ex-CEO of now defunct biotech company Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes. Before we proceed, if you love science-based health, wellness, and fitness education with some lulz and some dry sarcasm along the way, hit that subscribe button and join the lemonade stand. I would truly love to have you here. Without anything further, let's make lemonade. So the story of Elizabeth Holmes has been told time and time again across several social media platforms, including YouTube and some news outlets. The story has captured my interest for quite some time now, and even though it's been talked about several times over, I knew I still wanted to do a video on it, but I was waiting for her sentencing before I did. Just a few months ago, in November of 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to prison, although she is not currently sitting in a jail cell. More on that later. The reason I wanted to wait until she was sentenced was because I felt like that would be, I guess, the final chapter, so to speak. The end of that terrible story, the end of her saga. For now, anyway. So let's dive in. Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born on February 3rd, 1984. It is still so hard for me to believe that she's not that much older than me. So her mother's name was Noelle, and she was a congressional committee staffer. Her father's name was Christian Holmes, and he worked for Enron at some point, but he later transitioned to working for other government agencies. Something pretty interesting about her family history is that her great-grandfather, by marriage, his name was Charles Fleischmann. He founded the yeast company Fleischmann Yeast. And after learning that, I was quite torn. I don't care for Elizabeth Holmes' actions. I really don't like her face. But damn it, I love bread. So I guess I can say I really do appreciate her ancestors' contribution to the carb world. Thank you for that. Elizabeth was said to be clever, determined, and a motivated child. According to Business Insider, at age 7, she attempted to invent a time machine and filled up a notebook full of designs and ideas for her time machine. And it was around age 9 that she started telling family members that she wanted to be a billionaire when she grew up. And if I could be totally honest for a second, I hear all that, and right off the bat, without all the other stuff, it warms my heart. That level of tenacity, confidence, and innovativeness from a child is amazing. A lot of times children like this grow up to do amazing things and make incredible contributions to the world. Generally, these are all very positive signs that a child will grow up to not be a scammer or a fraud. Unfortunately, though, this was not the case for Elizabeth. Elizabeth was said to be extremely competitive, and she did not like losing. According to a Business Insider article about her, she would often play Monopoly as a child and always wanted to play until the end, until she collected all of the hotels and property, which probably took forever, because we all know one game of Monopoly takes painstakingly long to complete. I don't think I've ever finished a game of Monopoly in my life. I also personally just kind of find it to be a boring game. I hope I don't get canceled for that. It was said that if she were losing the game, she would get angry and storm off in a rage. So very indicative of her competitive nature. So Elizabeth attended St. John's High School in Houston, Texas. While in high school, her strong work ethic really blossomed, and she was a great student, earning straight A's. She really developed an interest in computer programming too, and she even made a small business out of selling C++ compilers to Chinese schools. And because I know absolutely nothing about computer technology, that sounds cool to me. The extent of my computer knowledge is editing and uploading videos to YouTube, Microsoft Word, and Blackboard for school. If you ask me to do anything else, my brain will implode and I will break the internet. So at some point, Elizabeth took a real strong interest in the Chinese culture. Her parents got her private tutoring to learn Mandarin, and she was able to attend Stanford University's summer Mandarin program. According to the Business Insider article I found while researching for this video, they use the phrase, quote, talked her way into, end quote, the program, the Mandarin program I just mentioned. I don't really know what that means. They didn't really go into detail, so I don't know, maybe her parents bribed somebody. I don't really know. I just thought that was interesting that they used that language. Also, if you hear snoring, it's Alpha. Alpha and Zeus are in here, and Alpha's asleep, and she's snoring, and she is adorable, and this is her house, not yours, and she's snoring. Deal with it. So anyway, with her participation in this program, she wound up going to Beijing, China. Super cool. China is on my bucket list. I want to see the Great Wall and just eat everything. In 2002, Elizabeth attended Stanford University, where she studied chemical engineering. She also worked as a student researcher and lab assistant. Also during her freshman year, she interned at the Genome Institute in Singapore, and during her time there, she tested for a severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus through the collection of blood samples with syringes. And yes, I just said coronavirus. A lot of people don't know this, but coronavirus is not necessarily a new virus. It didn't just show up over the last couple of years to ruin everybody's lives and inconvenience us. Wash your hands and don't lick doorknobs, please. Thank you. So when Elizabeth was a sophomore at Stanford, she approached one of her professors, whose name was Channing Robertson. You thought I was gonna say Channing Tatum, didn't you? Yeah. You wish. She goes to this professor and basically propositions him with the idea of starting a healthcare biotech company. And I guess he's like, oh, hells yeah, girl, let's do it. And from there, Elizabeth founded the company Real Time Cures. A little bit of a fun fact, according to Business Insider, because of a typo that happened, early employees of the company Real Time Cures, their paychecks actually said Real Time Curses. And initially when you hear that, it's hilarious. But when you step back and look at the bigger picture, it's almost like a bad omen for what's to come. Anyway, so she's founded Real Time Cures. Great, love that for her. Remember, at this point, she only has about a year of college. She's a sophomore, so at least a year, probably a little over a year at this point of college under her belt. And she's starting a healthcare biotechnology company. So at some point, she actually filed for her first patent for a wearable medical device. It delivered medication, it monitored blood, and adjusted medication dosage as needed. So by the following semester, she actually decided she wanted to drop out of Stanford. She convinced her parents to give her the tuition money that they were going to use for her next semester, to give it to her so that she could use it to work on building her company, Real Time Cures. Sidebar, if anyone has seen The Dropout on Hulu featuring Amanda Seyfried as Elizabeth Holmes and Naveen Andrews as Sunny Balwani. I did not mention Sunny Balwani before, but he's actually a pretty key player in all this. Elizabeth met Sunny Balwani while she was away at one of her summers at the Mandarin program. She was 19 at the time, and he was about 20 years older than her, and he was married, and I think he had children. Now, we're not going to clown an age gap relationship, okay? That's not what we're here to do. 19 is very young to be dating an almost 40-year-old, but 19 in the United States anyway is still an adult, okay? So we're all going to be mature about this. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention Sunny. Naveen Andrews is the actor that plays Sunny Balwani. I watched the whole series on Hulu, and it was fantastic. In my opinion, it was one of Amanda Seyfried's best roles. I don't think they could have casted anyone better to play Elizabeth Holmes than her. Anyway, I remember watching the scene where she was convincing her parents to give her, like, telling her parents she was dropping out of Stanford, but convincing them to give her the tuition money so that she could work on her business. It looked exactly how you might expect that scene to look like in real life. They were shocked at first, but eventually they did acquiesce, and they ended up giving her their blessing, and they agreed to give her tuition money. And then just like that, she was dropped out of college, and she had a nice chunk of capital to start working on building her business, her company. So she's a college dropout now. Congrats. And I'm not saying that to be sarcastic, you guys. You don't have to finish college if it's not for you. You don't even have to go to college if it's not for you. But if you decide to drop out of college, the hope and the expectation is that you'll have a plan for your future. When Elizabeth dropped out of college, she really did seem like she had a great idea and a great plan that she was going to put to good use to change the world. And truly, I think that's an amazing thing. Well, it would have been. So it was also around this time that she started officially dating Sunny Balwani, the guy that I just mentioned. What I don't know is if he was still married when they started dating or not. I guess it doesn't really matter. It's really not our business, but I'm a curious little lemon. So at this point, she is working on her biotech company, Real Time Cures, out of a basement. And at some point, I couldn't quite figure out when, the company got renamed to Theranos, the name that you have seen plastered all over the media when talking about Elizabeth Holmes. The name Theranos is a mashup between the words therapy and diagnosis. In my opinion, it's a clever name for a healthcare biotechnology company. So the entire foundation of Theranos is that they were going to revolutionize the way blood is collected and tested in healthcare. With the technology that Theranos was developing, they could run a blood test which required only a small finger prick for collection. They said that through these blood tests, they could detect things like high cholesterol and even cancer. They claimed that their technology could run over 200 blood tests with a single drop of blood. blood. Now, her idea for this technology is not totally random. Elizabeth had a fear of needles and she always hated getting her blood collected. That's not unusual. A lot of us don't like doing that. Nobody's like, yay, I get to give blood today, or yay, I get to get a bunch of shots today. A lot of us don't like getting poked, myself included. Also, can I just say, if anybody in healthcare is watching this and you regularly administer shots, why do only kids get treats? I was brave too. I didn't cry. I'm just saying, I would like a lollipop too. It's not a bad idea. Anyway, this technology that Theranos was developing sounded amazing, and it would have revolutionized the entire healthcare industry. It would have, if it actually worked. But it's not a crime to have a failed business venture. It's not a crime to have an idea that turns out to be a flop. What is a crime, however, is everything Elizabeth did in the pursuit of Theranos to change the world. So like most startups in their early days, Theranos needed some funding so that they could grow and expand. They needed investors. Elizabeth started getting in touch with very high profile and very prominent investors. And I remember seeing this part in the show, The Dropout. Things just seemed so hectic for Elizabeth and for the company. She looked terrible in the show. And by that, I don't mean that she looked ugly or anything. She looked completely disheveled. She was barely sleeping. If she did sleep, she was sleeping like 2 hours a night. Her hair was constantly messed up and she just looked exhausted. And what they were portraying were the beginning phases of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes was a hard worker. I will give her nothing else, but I will give her that. As she was portrayed in The Dropout, and as it sounds based on her upbringing, she was very headstrong and motivated. If only that work ethic had been put to better use. So Elizabeth is presenting their blood testing machine, it's called the Edison, to investor after investor, working tirelessly to get funding. And at this point, Theranos had raised over $700 million from investors. And at one point, the company was valued at $9 billion. So she took these investors' money on the condition that she did not have to reveal how Theranos technology worked. She also had the final say of everything that had to do with the company. Those are the conditions. Now, I'm not a millionaire, in case you didn't know. But if there are any millionaires watching this who regularly invest in startups, is it normal to put millions of dollars into a company but have no idea at all what the product does? I'm not trying to victim shame here. It just seems strange to me. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you have the money to blow, it's easier to just be like, here's $1 million, sweetie. Now go make daddy some more money. So behind the scenes of Theranos, Elizabeth was a very cutthroat boss. She got up early, stayed late, worked her ass off. And according to Business Insider, and I assume former employees, she expected everybody else to work that hard as well. At some point, Elizabeth started having dinner catered to the office at 8 p.m. every night to encourage people to stay and work. She was a very diligent, hard worker herself, but as a boss, she was just portrayed as not that great. I'm talking about in the show. She was not portrayed as just not very nice. She was constantly firing people left and right for the smallest things. And all of that is backed up by former employees who have since spoken out about their experience working at Theranos. They were also very secretive about operations at the company. She hired bodyguards to follow her around. Her office had bulletproof glass. In the show, they had new employees sign NDAs. People who were just visiting the headquarters had to sign NDAs before they were allowed to come in. She didn't want any prying eyes on her fancy technology. That didn't work. So it was also during all this time that Sunny Balwani, Sunny, was by her side. By the way, Sunny is just his nickname. I think his first name is Ramesh. But he goes by Sunny, so I'm calling him Sunny. He was by her side this whole time. He actually worked at the company as well, but they kept their relationship a secret. She appointed him as president and chief operating officer at Theranos. The assumption is that she probably kept their relationship a secret for a multitude of reasons. Maybe it was like the big age gap thing, but also I think in terms of legally it presents problems because that's a huge conflict of interest for them to be in a romantic relationship. So this is also worth noting. I just said Sunny was appointed president and COO of Theranos, the healthcare biotech company. Meanwhile, this man had absolutely no background in the medical field or biotechnology whatsoever. Sunny Balwani was actually a very wealthy, successful man, but he was wealthy because he started his own tech company at some point, and he later sold it for millions. But he had absolutely no healthcare or science background whatsoever. And also another reminder, Elizabeth had started this biotechnology company after dropping out of college as a sophomore while studying for her chemical engineering degree. She was a sophomore when she dropped out. Highly doubt she knew enough to start a biotech company with basically just a few classes of chemistry under her belt. That theme came out a lot in the series The Dropout. Like Elizabeth wanting things for Theranos technology that were just not possible. But she refused to take no for an answer, and it was largely because she just didn't understand the science of what she was trying to do. And then if she didn't get what she wanted, People got fired, and her inexperience eventually did become a problem, like for the board of directors of her company. In 2008, the board actually tried to replace her as CEO with somebody who was more experienced, but she seems very manipulative. She somehow convinced them to let her stay. So as the word of Theranos is spreading, they started to gain a lot of attention in the media. Elizabeth was on the cover of Forbes and Fortune magazines. She gave TED Talks. She met the Clintons, for fuck's sake. Eventually, Theranos started to collaborate with big names in the medical world, such as Capital Blue Cross and Cleveland Clinic. She also made a deal with Walgreens to begin using Theranos testing centers in their stores. She also apparently developed a secret partnership with Safeway, which was worth $350 million. And at some point during Theranos history, the United States Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, gave them approval for their herpes simplex virus 1 test. At one point, she was the youngest female self-made billionaire in the world. Theranos and Elizabeth were on top of the world. But you know what they say. With great power comes great bullshittery. And boy, was there some bullshittery. So I mentioned before that the company had this amazing revolutionary technology that didn't even work. And this was ultimately the reason for their demise, because if the technology had worked the way Elizabeth said it did, we wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be making this video right now. The downfall of Theranos seemed to be a slow and impending detonation. Scientists at the company were adamant with explaining to Elizabeth that the technology just wasn't ready for the public to use because it just had so many inaccuracies and it just needed to be refined. On top of that, scientists from the outside looking in Theranos started to be more vocal about the company because they could all just see that something was just fishy. Elizabeth knew all this, but she just didn't care. And this is likely the reason why she was so secretive and elusive about the company and the inner workings of their technology and what they did, because she knew it didn't work. It became obvious that she really just cared about her public image and about being right and about being the best. She refused to be a failure, and that came at a very high cost. By August of 2015, the FDA was on to Theranos, and they had launched an investigation into them and their technology. In the report they made public about the company, they cited many inaccuracies and issues in the equipment. For example, the nanotainer, the small container used to hold the blood sample. If you've seen like the cool, nice, professional photos of Elizabeth before she was disgraced, you've probably seen her holding that little container. The problem was that this device did not have regulatory approval. So a little bit later on that same year, in walks another key player in this game. John Carreyrou. He was a journalist for the Wall Street Journal. He had launched a secret investigation against Theranos, which had lasted months. Now, this was not out of nowhere. He actually started his investigation off of a tip from a medical expert at Theranos who thought that the blood testing device, the Edison, seemed off. Carreyrou, which is a super fun last name, by the way, he spoke to multiple whistleblowers who were all former Theranos employees. And it was through these connections and quite a bit of sleuthing, I assume, that he was able to get his hands on some company documents. Eventually, though, Elizabeth caught wind of what John Carreyrou was doing, and she started going hard with trying to silence him, which included both legal and financial threats against the Wall Street Journal and the ex-employees who were acting as whistleblowers and feeding him information. People with big influence, power, and money trying to silence others for speaking the truth. Where have we seen that before? So, despite the legal threats and intimidation tactics, the Wall Street Journal published John Carreyrou's article about Theranos. And boy, did he spill the tea. Or should I say, blood. The article detailed how the Edison device gave inaccurate results and didn't work. He reported that Theranos was actually using other commercially available machines made by other companies for most of the blood testing. Later on, during the course of the eventual trial, Elizabeth would actually admit to this. They were lying to everyone by testing patient blood samples using other technology that did not belong to Theranos. Now, Elizabeth, in my opinion, is an egomaniac who's obsessed with her image. So when this article came out, of course she went straight on the defense. She of course denied all the claims. She said that the Wall Street Journal was just a tabloid, and she also promised that Theranos would eventually share the accuracy of their tests. She appeared on CNBC's Mad Money and said about the article, quote, "This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world." End quote. profound. So a lot of people say that John Carreyrou's article about Theranos was truly the beginning of their demise. By 2016, the FDA was neck deep in their investigation of Theranos, but so was the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. The CMS sent Theranos a warning letter after they inspected the facility and found abnormalities in staff competency, issues with the procedures, and issues with the equipment. In July of 2016, CMS banned Elizabeth from owning, operating, or directing blood testing services for 2 years. Now, Theranos did appeal this ban with the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Shortly after that, Walgreens ended up terminating their relationship with Theranos and closed the wellness centers where they did their blood collection. The FDA also finally ordered Theranos to stop using their nanotainer device. So the shit was really starting to hit the fan, but was it though? Things are about to get a whole lot worse, believe me. In 2017, the state of Arizona filed a lawsuit against Theranos. They alleged that the company sold 1.5 million blood tests to Arizonians while misrepresenting or hiding facts about the tests. Now, according to the Hulu series The Dropout, some of these tests included a false HIV positive and a false cancer diagnosis. This is not just a false, oh, you have the cold, but you don't really have the cold. HIV and cancer are pretty life-changing diseases to live with. That lawsuit was settled out in April of 2017 when Theranos agreed to refund the cost of the blood test to the consumers and pay a bunch of civil fines and attorney fees, all of which cost the company a whopping $4.6 million. And that's just one of many legal issues that Theranos face. That's not even the big one. In March of 2018, the United States Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, charged Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani with fraud. This was for taking over $700 million from investors while advertising a false product. This fraud charge actually also included that the company made false claims that Theranos technology was being used by United States Department of Defense, DoD employees in combat. I thought that was so bizarre, like to make a claim like that about your product. So weird. But it is a false claim nonetheless. Elizabeth settled this lawsuit by relinquishing voting and financial control of Theranos. She also paid a $500,000 fine and returned 18.9 million shares of Theranos stock. In June of 2018, Theranos announced that Elizabeth would be stepping down as CEO. On the same day of this announcement, the United States Department of Justice announced that a federal grand jury had charged Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani with 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit fraud. Both of them pled not guilty to these charges. By September of 2018, the company had announced its formal dissolution and the remaining employees were laid off. So Elizabeth got herself a lawyer and the trial eventually began in August of 2021. What was the delay, you might ask? Well, this was back in 2021, so one obvious delay was COVID. But also, she requested another delay because she was pregnant. So at this point, she and Sunny Balwani were no longer a thing. I read that they were together for like a while. I think like 10 or 11 years. But at this point, their relationship had ended and she found herself a new boo thing. Some guy named William Billy Evans. He is the heir to a hospitality property management company in California. They reportedly got engaged in 2019 and married in a private ceremony later that year. And I guess in Elizabeth's head, she's like, you know, I'm awaiting trial for some pretty serious charges here. I could spend a very long time in jail. Let's have a baby. Now, I'm about to voice what very well might be a controversial opinion. However, I did share this to my Instagram story, and it seemed to not necessarily be an unpopular opinion. It actually seems to be quite a popular opinion, but it might still be a controversial take. Now, you can think I'm only saying this because I don't have kids and I don't want kids, but I kind of feel like a lot of parents watching this will agree with me on this. Let me know. In my opinion, I feel like Elizabeth's pregnancy was a strategic move to avoid trial and ultimately try to get out of jail time. Why would any level-headed person in Elizabeth's position think that that would be a good time to have a baby? I mean, in a way it worked because the trial was delayed a few months because of her pregnancy. It was kind of like, you know, like a sympathy baby. I can't possibly face the consequences of my actions. I'm a new mom. As you guys can probably imagine, I watch a lot of true crime, and I'm very familiar with a lot of true crime cases. Something that I have seen happen quite a bit in a lot of true crime cases is a woman getting pregnant, and then that delays the trial because she has to be pregnant and have the baby. And in some cases, I've even heard of it changing the course of the case. Like, for example, maybe instead of sitting jail, now that she's pregnant, now she gets to just sit at home on house arrest. Because she's pregnant. Yeah, and people call me selfish for not wanting children. Imagine finding out you only exist because your mom didn't want to face the consequences of her actions. Imagine finding out you exist because you're being used as a pawn in a legal game of cat and mouse. Obviously, all of this is my opinion and speculation. I have no evidence of any of this. But I just feel like to become pregnant at a time like Elizabeth was in, at a time like that, is stupid, and I feel like it's an extremely selfish move, and I feel like it only serves one purpose: to gain sympathy. Anyway, so trial started in August of 2021. The case was prosecuted by the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California. Elizabeth testified in her defense, and she made claims such as being misled about the technology by her staff, that her former paramour, Sunny Balwani, held influence over her during their relationship while they were criming together. Her defense team tried to argue that she just tried her hardest and ultimately failed, and failure is not a crime. The case also detailed Elizabeth's roles in faking demonstrations for the equipment, falsifying validation reports, and overstating finances at Theranos. For all of her crimes, she was facing a maximum of 20 years in prison. So the prosecution brought in about 30 witnesses, which included investors, former Theranos employees, and even patients, and they all poured the tea, let me tell you. In the closing arguments, the prosecutor said that Elizabeth, quote, chose fraud over business failure, end quote, while her defense team contended that, quote, building a business, not a criminal enterprise, end quote. On January 3rd, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. This included 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Some of the initial charges were dropped, such as defrauding patients. Ultimately, all of her charges were really just related to fraud. She wasn't charged for anything directly related to inaccurate test results for patients. So this was in January 2022 that she was found guilty, but she wouldn't be sentenced until several months later. So it was on November 18th, 2022 that United States District Judge Edward DeVillis sentenced Elizabeth to 11 1/4 years, 135 months in prison. Now, I know I probably speak for a lot of us when I say this. I am shocked that she actually got prison time, honestly. I really thought that she was just going to get away with just having to pay a bunch of fines, which is really nothing, especially since she married into a wealthy family. Fines would probably be no big deal. However, after her sentencing, she was not immediately taken into custody. She is currently free on a $500,000 bond and does not have to start serving her sentence until April of 2023. So she gets a little vacation before she has to go to prison. Oh, and by the way, in October of 2022, weeks before she was sentenced to 135 months in prison, it came out that little Miss Elizabeth was knocked up again. Oh, look at that. I'm pregnant before my hearing for my sentencing, where I could spend up to 20 years in prison. How opportune of her to get pregnant at a time like that. Yeah, and if you are not picking up what I'm putting down, I am of the firm belief and opinion that this second pregnancy, was also a strategic attempt to garner sympathy, to try and get a lighter sentence, or no sentence at all. Judge can never send me to jail. I'm a mom. I have to be there for my babies. Women have children in prison all the time, okay? You are no different. Don't worry, girl. You're gonna look real cute in those prison stripes. So, my friends, that was the riveting tale of ex-Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes. So I just want to close with more of my thoughts and opinions before we cut the camera here. Once again, I was pleasantly surprised that she was even handed prison time. I personally doubted she would have to serve any real time behind bars. Yes, she was sentenced to over a decade in prison. Great. But the next question is, will she actually remain in prison for the duration of her sentence? If you're familiar with true crime or just the American justice system in general, it's not uncommon for somebody who's sentenced to prison for a very long time to be able to get out early on something like good behavior or a technicality. So while Elizabeth did commit multiple crimes, they were not violent crimes. So personally, my personal opinion, I'm not a legal professional in any way. I think it's very likely that she probably won't be serving her entire 11 in a quarter year, 135-month sentence. I was talking to my mom about this case a little while ago. Reminder, my mom is a licensed, non-practicing attorney. She does not practice law, and she has not for a while, but she does maintain her license to practice. And I only bring that up because there's, you know, a lot of people might be thinking, well, Brianna, why would I care what your mom says? Which is totally fair, but I brought it up because my mom has a legal background. So that's why when it comes to legal things, I consider my mom an authority figure in this. So her opinion lines up with mine in that Elizabeth Holmes will probably not serve her entire sentence. My mom agreed with me, and she said in her opinion, she sees her as an Elizabeth maybe getting out early on good behavior or a technicality or after an appeal or something like that. That's our freaking justice system over here in the United States. As far as Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, I truly believe that with her ambition, drive, and work ethic, she really could have contributed some amazing things to biotechnology and healthcare. I think the problem is that she just cared more about succeeding in the eyes of the world and just more about money than actually doing things right and with truth. In my opinion, even with her work ethic and drive, she clearly lacks integrity. I also happen to think she has a massive ego as well. To think you have enough education to start a healthcare biotech company with just a few college chemistry classes under your belt is absurd. How can you even understand the science of what you're trying to do if you can't even comprehend the basics? How incredibly arrogant does somebody have to be to think that they can accomplish something of that magnitude with such a small amount of the proper education? Something else I feel like this did was hurt up-and-coming female entrepreneurs in the biotech industry. Elizabeth was kind of working against the odds as a woman, and she knew that. Like a lot of high-powered industries, the biotech industry is very male-dominated. But here comes this young woman, really young woman, because remember, she was like 19 or 20, and with this great idea, she really shook things up. And I know there's gonna be people who say, well, she's white and she came from money, so she was already privileged. Obviously, I'm not gonna say that that's not true. Obviously, she did come from a privileged background, but she was still a very young woman walking into a male-dominated industry. So in this context, my focus is just on the fact that she's a woman. Ironically, however, she took a lot of her inspiration from one of the most well-known male icons in tech, Steve Jobs. She started dressing like him on an almost daily basis, where she always wore a black turtleneck. There was also the thing that everybody talks about that I didn't mention in this video. That was her obviously forced baritone voice.
I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the Journal would publish something like this when we had sent them over 1,000 pages of documentation demonstrating that the statements in their piece were false.
People who knew her earlier, before Theranos, like while she was still in college, said that she had like a normal, higher pitched, more typical natural female voice. It was said that she intentionally dropped her voice to be taken more seriously as a woman in that industry. It had to be uncomfortable for her to talk like that all the time. Assuming her voice really is forced because, you know, her family says that that was her natural speaking voice. But I mean, a lot of people who grew up with her and knew her when she was younger said that that was not natural. So anyway, at the very end of the series, The Dropout, they shared some text on screen, and it was just about the aftermath of the fallout of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. It said that in the wake of the fallout of Theranos, female entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, where Theranos was headquartered, struggled to find funding for their ideas and for their businesses and projects. I'll try and put it up on the screen. I remember it saying that one female founder was even told to dye her hair to look less like Elizabeth Holmes. I just feel like that really goes to show how much of a negative impact that Elizabeth Holmes and her actions had on women in the biotech industry and those wanting to get into the biotech industry. Women already had a hard enough time not being taken seriously in this space. Now they're really not going to be taken seriously because of her. It's just an unbelievable story all around. How one woman's refusal to admit defeat with her enduring determination was her ultimate downfall. And on that very poetic note, I think we're done here. If you made it to the end of this video, comment blonde. So I know you made it to this point. If you did, you're the real MVP and you get a fudge covered Oreo in Starbucks. And my camera just died, but I'm gonna keep talking into the microphone. I'm just gonna pop lemon head up here. If you enjoyed this, hit the like button. If you wanna see more, hit the subscribe button. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Queen Lemon, over and out.
It's a new dawn. Birds flying high.
Take a night, baby.
Double. Good night, baby.